formal introduction to direct democracy at all.
Okay.
So this is all new for me, other than what I've heard from my son and kind of what I caught in a little bit of the live stream you did with Chris Lewis. And so we should be live on Facebook now. So I'm going to tag you and give people a chance to get in. It is election night, and I know everyone's racing in from the polls now. So,
Oh man.
And yeah, you know, and so the thing is, when it comes to me with voting, and I like to ask people a lot of questions, and I'm not anti-vote and I'm not pro-vote. I ask the question: is anything changing? We've been doing something for a very long time now. And the definition of insanity, to me anyway, that philosophers handed down, the ones I like to listen to, is, you know, if you continue to do the same thing over and over and over and over, and you expect a different result, you are going to go insane. And what I'm noticing in our world right now, in our country, as everyone has their stickers, I was watching the stickers today. They all got their I voted stickers, which is very interesting. But I understand what they're trying to do. That's what I've been trying to do my entire life. So we've got a couple folks in the room tonight. And so anyway, I want to introduce, this is Brother Nick Greco. He's going to talk to us tonight a little bit about direct democracy. And introduce yourself, Brother Nick. So how did you get involved with direct democracy?
So, you know, like most of you, I've been involved with politics, you know, pretty much all my life. You know, for me, it all changed back in 2008, 2009, when the financial crisis happened in the States and worldwide, for that matter. And even before that, you know, I had my suspicions about representative democracy here in Canada. And at that point, I just started losing hope. And then for me, the final straw was that financial collapse, where the politicians allowed it to happen. And essentially, after it was all said and done, not only were they not jailed, but they were actually given money. They were actually bailed out by the taxpayers. So, you know, I'm just thinking to myself, well, you know, if these so-called politicians or representatives are supposed to represent us, wouldn't they put us as their top priority? But apparently not. And for me, that was the end of it. And I did come across a gentleman by the name of Gerald Celente, who runs the Trends Forecast, and he's a brilliant man. And he mentioned something about direct democracy. So right away, I had to look into it. And, you know, when I researched it and I seen it and I right there, then and there, I said, you know what, this is the only way to go. It's actually called true democracy. And the reason why is because the citizens vote on the issues, not the political parties or politicians. So essentially, the citizens are the executives of the country, of the state, here in Canada, the provinces, or your local city or town. And that's the way true democracy really is. What you have now is a so-called democracy, and it's not really representative like people claim it to be. And as far as I'm concerned, if we want to evolve as humans, well, we better start supporting independents that are going to bring direct democracy and actually consult with the citizens directly. Because if we keep going down the same path, then we're just going to self-destruct. As you can see, the system of capitalism, which these political parties support, is actually destroying the planet. And it's going to continue on because the big motive is, of course, greed. So I think the people, the citizens, are actually the checks and balances of society. And if you don't ask them directly, then you're going to get more of the same greed and corruption.
More of the same. But let me ask you a question, Brother Nick. Tough question. Can adults make their own decisions, though? I mean, at a certain point in time, do you think adults really should be able to drive their own society?
Well, here's the thing. The adults have never been given a chance. As you know, this system that we have now is a class system. So, of course, the super wealthy are highly educated. But, of course, the internet has changed that. So maybe 15, 20 years ago, I would probably say, yeah, you know what? I don't think we're ready for that. But now with information at our fingertips, I don't think there's any excuse. And I always tell people that there's always 2 to 3 sides of each story. And you shouldn't believe just one narrative. You got to believe many narratives in order to make an informed decision. So again, like, look, we have Facebook, we have YouTube, we have all these social media platforms that we can get our information from. So really, there's no excuse any longer. You know, back in the day, we only had encyclopedia books to look at, but that's not the case any longer. It's really changed.
And actually, that's a good point, because the way I think about it, I push back to the teletype. I think, I mean, a lot of the representative model came out of what, you know, we used to ride horses. And when you needed to ride a horse to go down and vote, and you had a hemp farm that you had to grow, you had chickens and cows you needed to see to, the wife was yelling at you. And so you needed to have a representative government. And so, but once we've gotten past horse technology, we had the teletype, we had, you know, telephones, we had the ability to move forward with a model that was really outdated and a legacy model. We never updated our government. We've kept this model of farmers riding horses into DC to vote. And I kind of, I say that kind of as a joke in terms of, you know, can an adult make their own decisions? But you brought up a good point, which is going back to the days of the World Book and the encyclopedia. You know, I joke with the kids that, you know, our Google was the encyclopedia man. Twice a year or once a year, he'd come to the door. One year, I think it was the World Book, and the other was the Britannica guy. And he'd knock on the door and he'd give you the encyclopedia. And so our world only changed once a year. You know, there might be minor changes in our world through National Geographic and magazines, Ranger Rick, but for the most part, we were kind of kept in bubbles. But now with the invention of the internet, adults can do their own research. They can look into matters, they can form their own opinions. And so that's the basis of direct democracy then, right? So if I give a summary of what I just understand, as opposed to you voting for another person, an identity to represent you, everybody would represent themselves. And so what laws would come forward, referendums, I guess a big referendum model where you vote for what you want, as opposed to voting for a party or an identity to make a decision for you in your stead.
Well, actually, the way it really works is there's something called initiatives, right? So, so as a citizen like you and I, citizen of Canada, a citizen of the States, we can take up an initiative, Jared. For instance, you can take up an initiative for, you know, maybe more stricter rules or laws on the environment. And the way the process works is you would have to collect signatures. And depending on the level of government it is, it might be higher, it might be lower. So for instance, if it's your local town, it would be a little bit lower. So depending on what the required amount of signatures might be for that town, if you meet that, then essentially the local government would have to acknowledge that, and then you would have to set a date for a referendum. So that's the power of initiatives and referendums, is that the actual citizens can create laws and legislation on pretty much everything, except for individual rights, where a lot of people get mixed up with. People think that's if you have a direct democracy, that it's a tyranny of the majority, where you can actually vote citizens out of the country. Well, no, you can't do that, because you have local constitutions that protect individual rights. So that can never happen. And of course, if you do elect a representative, and that representative wants to take up an initiative, well, you know, again, it has to be taken to the people, whether they want a yes or a no. So again, the system itself is checks and balances from stopping basically bad policy from ever seeing the day of light, right? Or light of day, excuse me.
Right. And so where do representatives fit in this model? Okay, so where would they go?
So there's so many ways we can approach this, but the Direct Democracy Coalition the way we're approaching this is that we want to seek out individuals who want to run as independents. And they're going to have to sign a contract swearing that they will uphold to bring in direct democracy to the citizens. And the way they do that is they're going to do that through technology. So, for example, there was a gentleman by the name of Michael Allman who ran, I believe, down in California as a Republican. But his promise was, if he got elected, that he wasn't going to vote on the issues. It was actually going to be his constituents through his website. So, we prefer independence because we really don't want them being affiliated with a party, because we want them to be faithful and true to the constituents. But we're not going to say no to Republicans or Democrats either. If they want to be bold and they want to bring direct democracy to their constituents, then yeah, we'll bring them in. But I think that's the first way we have to start it, because you got to remember, a lot of people don't know what direct democracy is. So this is the best pathway. This is the best path in order to educate constituents. Then eventually, Gerard, we can the constituents, the citizens, are going to be well educated. It might take a few years, but they'll be well educated on it. And then you know what, we can implement it in the United States Constitution, and we can implement it basically anywhere in the world. Oh. So that's how we want to initially. Yep. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Don't know what happened, but he disappeared for a moment. So while he is perhaps resetting.
I can see you, Gerard. Gerard, I can see you.
Or is it just me? Can you guys see Nick? And can you hear me? That's the first question. Yes or no? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can I get a thumbs up? Yes. You hear me. You see me. Don't see Nick because I don't see Nick. You see and hear both. All right, let me reset and see if this does. Can you hear me, Nick? Can you hear me? Okay, I can see you. I can't hear you. Can you reset your browser? Refresh your browser. Okay, looks like he's doing a reset. This happens. It's a BeLive bug. It happens. You guys can hear and see both of us. He's got to reset and come back here. He's coming back now. Sorry about that. This is what happens when you get good. This is what happens when you start saying something that makes sense. And this is actually making a lot of sense. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
See, this is it's a BeLive bug. I don't know if it's the CIA. I think it's a BeLive bug, but I think you're really, really saying something that's important. So the basis being a constitution and individual rights being protected, voting on different referendums that come up that we promote, and representatives can champion that, what the Democrats or Republicans or parties can be engaged in the system. So it's not like you're tossing them out, you're grafting in a little more control for citizens. Did I get that right?
Yeah. So if parties were to exist under a direct democratic system, and we had obviously direct democracy, if the Republican Party drafted up a law that the majority of people did not like, then they can stop it, because essentially the referendum is the check and balance overall. So if people don't agree with something that the Republican Party or even the Democratic Party come up with, then yeah, the citizens can say, no, we don't want it. And that's the end of the story. Where now you absolutely have no power. Once you vote, you give up your power. You're like a proxy. And you give up your power over to the party, and then that's the end of the story. And they basically do whatever they want, and you can't do a single thing about it. I mean, the only thing you can really do is wait 4 years or 2 years and then try to vote them out. But the problem is that everybody votes out a party not because of policies. They vote other parties out because they're bad. So they rather vote out one party that's bad over another party that's not as bad but still bad. So it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right. Well, it keeps corruption in place, right? Because I mean, what I can see, most of my friends that are Democrats, they don't really like the Democrats. They tolerate the Democrats. They hate the Republicans, and most of the Republicans I know, they don't love the Republicans. They just tolerate the Republican leadership, but they really hate the Democrats. And so it's interesting. And the same thing with the identities. They vote for someone who stands as their proxy to vote on these things. But after you vote for that person, you give everything away to that person. That person can be almost anything for 4 years or even permanently. They could run into mental illness. They could be lying on their platform. And so it's the current model we have is like a hotbed for corruption. And you don't have a choice. You have to keep, they feel like they're locked in. Like right now, everyone's got their I voted stickers, and I kind of smile at that a little bit. But they feel like they don't have a choice. They'd rather get 20% of what they feel is important and 80% of something other than to get anything from the other side. So now, is this implemented in parts of Canada? And the other question I have, has this been tried before?
Okay, so here in Canada, it hasn't been implemented, but in certain provinces, they can have referendums, but at the political party's discretion. So the political parties or the politicians have to give it a go. They have to give, basically, you have to get permissions. You have to get permission from them in order to have a referendum. Usually, they'll have like an opinion poll. But that's not really binding. So, the only country right now that's got it is Liechtenstein, I think, has it. And I believe Switzerland has a direct democratic model. But again, Gerard, we can build something way better than Switzerland here in the States and, of course, in Canada, if we really wanted to. So, and I believe that in the States, there are certain states that do have it. But there's different forms of it. Some that you have to actually ask for permission from your local congressman, and I think others that it's binding. I'm not too sure about that. I have to ask some of the guys in the coalition that live in the States. So,
are you getting any pushback?
Oh, all the time. I hear it's a tyranny of the majority. It's mob rule and so forth and so forth. It's just unbelievable that what they have. But the thing is that, okay, sure, it's a tyranny of the majority, but let's keep in mind, it's not the tyranny, it's the consensus of the majority when you're voting in a referendum. Because at the end of the day, you have to have over 51% at least to either vote down the referendum or to vote in the referendum. I mean, you have to have some sort of majority. But what they don't realize is that now the system that they have in place now is actually tyranny of the minority. Because you got 535 congressmen or representatives that dictate over 300 million people. Yeah. So again, I don't know how you can make. I know you could say direct democracy is mob rule when you're actually living under a mob rule right now.
Well, it's worse than that. I mean, it's not. There might be 500 representatives, but the reality is there are probably only 7 industries. There are probably only 20 or so companies that are spending the majority of the money with these politicians. And so it's not even a tyranny by 500 or by minority. It's a tyranny by corporatocracy. It's a tyranny by corporations. And so there's no question that the excuse that it's a tyranny mob rule is that's a useless argument. That's pointless. Right now, we're a lot worse than what we've ever been. We have a lot less control in our government than what we've ever been.
But Gerald, the problem here is that they keep complaining about tyranny of the majority, but they don't say nothing about the tyranny of the minority. So that's a tiny minority if you really think about it. We all know the politicians are for the most case, puppets, and they're being controlled by a small group of very wealthy people. But again, when you ask Americans that, they have no issues with it, apparently, because they keep calling it, tyranny of the majority. Look, it's easier to corrupt 535 people than it is to corrupt 300 million. I'm not saying that it's not possible. It is possible, but you can't bribe 300 million people. And right. At the end of the day, depending where you're from, you're going to want what's best for your community. you're not going to sell out your community, because it's going to affect you also. So you got to keep that in mind too. So yeah, those are some of the things I hear about direct democracy. And the problem is that they've been told, that the founding fathers called it that. And the reason why the founding fathers said that, because you got to keep in mind that, they were rich slave owners. And it's kind of hypocritical that, they're calling that tyranny of the majority, when in fact they were tyrannical because they had slaves. So I guess freedom was okay for them, but I guess freedom wasn't okay for the slaves. And people they can't connect to that for some reason. Some people do, but for the most part, they look at the founding fathers as these great sages, these great heroic people, but when in fact they were heavily flawed, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, definitely heavily flawed. We need to move forward. And Rebecca had a question in terms of just explaining clearly the difference between mob rule and direct democracy. And do you want to take that? I mean, I can make it.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, go for it.
Okay, so by definition, mob rule is a tiny group of criminals that commit illegal acts. If you look up at the definition of it, you'll see it. So I don't know how you can equate mob rule with direct democracy. Direct democracy is, again, it's consensus of the majority. And again, look, every referendum that comes and goes, for instance, it's not going to be the same 51% they're going to either vote yes or no. That's ridiculous. Gerald, there might be some referendums that you and I might vote in agreement with, but then there might be some others that, you might say no, and I might say yes. So out of 10 referendums, I'm just using a hypothetical here, I might win 1 out of the 10. But at least at the end of the day, it's truly democratic, because you ask the citizens directly. And, obviously it's the people that make the country. And when you don't consult in the people, if you don't ask the people to be involved directly in the policies, then you cannot call it democracy. End of story.
Right. Well, we've had 2 universities already put forward that study that America, that corporations have more influence in the government than Americans actually do. So I guess the way I look at it too, I look at it as an evolution, right? I mean, I've got my utopian ideas, and I'm very honest, and I put them out there for everybody. But the reality is that we probably do have to walk through to getting better and better and better. When I look back at the founding fathers, I don't see sages, but I see people who were fleeing tyranny. Now, mind you, they killed a lot of people when they got here, but they were fleeing tyranny, and they started to put together an upgrade of a model from feudalism, right? And so where I see us now is, it's not that we jump to a utopia. I'd love that to happen, but that may not be realistic. But we take the next step, right? We know democracy is better than anything we've had in the past. We know democracy by 300 million people who can all decide the future and the direction of their government is better than 20 corporations or 500 people in Washington. And so I guess the way I look at it is that we have to keep moving forward. We don't have a good model, and that model should get better every generation. And I think with the disgust that most people have for American politics right now is a really good time to start having these discussions.
No, I totally agree. And our group, we're constantly talking to people all the time. We get into a lot of disagreements, and we get, there's some people that are like turning around and saying, you know what, yeah, moving forward, this is really the only way this is really the only direction we can head in, because we've tried this system for many years, and, election after election, it just fails. So it's just proven that you can't rely on a group of individuals to make your country prosper, so to speak. So you have to do it yourself. You have to be involved, and direct democracy is really the only way where citizens can get involved directly. And I guarantee you, Gerard, if you have people voting on the issues, this country will turn around in a positive way real quick, because the majority of people want what's best for the country and want what's best for their communities. And if you look at Switzerland, Switzerland is probably one of the, in terms of high standards of living, Switzerland is right up there. And a lot of people say, yeah, but they're an isolation country, and this, and you know what, they are. because they really want nothing to do with anybody else, because they think that we're all a bunch of maniacs because we support a system that keeps us oppressed, where they have a system where they are involved directly in all the issues. And if politicians make or try to make bad laws, they will stop them right in their tracks. And unfortunately, we don't have that here, and is why we're falling apart as not only as countries but as a world, basically.
Right. Well, we're decaying. We're decaying as a people. We're decaying. I mean, if you look at the things that our government's involved in, and this is why I'm not a big proponent of the voting system at all right now, because no matter who you vote for, you still get death, destruction, oppression, and people are getting angrier and angrier. They're getting more polarized and polarized. And so I think anything that gives people more control in their life is a great thing. But one thing that interests me, though, is in terms of, have you run into any discussions around undoing the current problems we have right now? So we have probably hundreds, if not thousands, of unconstitutional laws on the books. I guess there's a facility for voting out bad laws. Like, how would that even work? How do we get rid of some of the things that are keeping us from living freer, respecting the Constitution?
Well, again, going back to the initiatives, if there are any current laws that are essentially bad laws, then again, people can take up an initiative by collecting signatures, getting the required amount of signatures, government acknowledging it, and then putting it to a referendum. So I'm all for eliminating political parties entirely and just having independence for now. And then eventually we don't have to have independence at all. And then we can have basically everything can be done online, but we're still far away from that. But what we can have is we can have political action committees, or we can even have think tanks. Okay. And these, it could be environmental think tanks, it could be policy think tanks, whatever. And essentially these think tanks can take up initiatives. But again, the important thing is that the final say is up to the executives, which would be you and I in our respective countries. So yeah, the people can stop bad laws, and again, they can create good laws. It's basically it's up to the will of the people, really.
So an interesting thing, Sister Tori just posted, she was talking about Switzerland, and she said Switzerland had a referendum to get rid of their central banks. I don't know how much you know about the Federal Reserve and central banking here. Do you think that that's a possibility?
Okay, so it's interesting that she brought that referendum up, and I was really majorly disappointed in the Swiss people. So essentially what the Swiss people wanted to do was they wanted to make their central bank sovereign, and they wanted their bank to be the issuer of money, printing and issuing. So right now, I think I believe they're like the same as the Federal Reserve and here in Canada, where the Central Bank of Canada prints the money, but they don't issue it. What happens is we tender out the loans to the BIS or the IMF. And essentially when provinces, which are state equivalent, when provinces here in Canada need to borrow money, they have to do it through a private lender. Whereas before in 1974 here in Canada, provinces were borrowing money from the Bank of Canada, interest-free pretty much, and they would have to pay it back in a reasonable amount of time. But after 74, that all changed. And if you noticed, you could take a look at one of our graphs, the debt level after 74, when Trudeau, this is Trudeau's father, the current prime minister, when he made a decision to loan out the money to private banks, well, our debt just skyrocketed. Because you got to remember, the money before was interest-free, and now the money has got heavy interest on it. So I was really disappointed in the Swiss people when they voted it down, because that was going to make their country even better, and they could have eliminated poverty just like that, and they could have had guaranteed jobs, and so forth and so forth. But they decided, and again, they were scared by propaganda by the Swiss corporations and of course the Swiss banks, saying that it would lead to an economic meltdown, which is really not true. But yeah, I really paid attention to that referendum in particular, and I was really disappointed in the Swiss people. But again, you know what, Gerard, that's the will of the people, if that's what they want. But the good thing is that the Swiss people can learn from that mistake, and maybe down the road, the majority of them are going to realize that, yeah, you know what, we need our own sovereign bank in order for this country to prosper. And again, down the road, they can take up another initiative, and they can collect the signatures, and they can put it to a vote again.
Right.
And that's the beauty of direct democracy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because if something doesn't work, you can get rid of it. I mean, it's one of the things I loved about corporate America when I was trapped in that that plantation, was that, you know, we had measurable results for everything, right? You started up a project, call it a law. You know, you had measurable results that it had to perform, and if it didn't work, we backed the project out. You know, I mean, corporate America is a great engine for productivity. And the same thing with the law. If you roll a law out, it doesn't have the results that you want, and the people want it gone, they should be able to get rid of it. So I like that. And I guess, and then what you're mentioning Switzerland, that kind of reminds me, is that what also happened in Ireland, right? Wasn't there a referendum in Ireland to either be removed from British rule in some sort of way, separating out their economy, going back 2 or 3 years or something, and the people voted to stay attached to Britain? And I guess if I can remember that right, if I'm even remembering it right, the biggest issue, though, was the media controlling the minds of the people. And so I think that's another thing that maybe this is where Rebecca was going with that earlier, is that if the media is allowed to continue in the way it is in the United States, I don't know how bad it is in Canada, but in the United States, the media is gone. It's almost completely state run. And if you control what people are watching, then you can scare them with reefer madness. You can scare them with getting rid of their central bank or the Federal Reserve. The economy is going to collapse. If we don't bail out the banks, this will happen. So we've got all those scare things going. But I guess, and I'm kind of talking a little bit there, but I guess to a degree, citizens could get together and pass referendums to go back to breaking up monopolies. We could pass referendums to go back to not having state influence in Facebook and social media and things like that. And so that's it. But anyway, I'm sorry. So do you remember what happened in Ireland? Is that similar?
Okay, so I think the Ireland thing probably ties into the Brexit. And I don't know if people knew about the Brexit, but the UK had a referendum to break away from the European Union, and the majority of people voted in favor. Now, I know the Scots, the Scottish did not like that, and I believe perhaps maybe the Irish didn't like it either. So maybe that ties in somehow, some way. I'm not 100% sure. But going back to Ireland, I do talk to a few people that have a direct democracy party there in Ireland, and they had told me that in their Irish constitution, they actually had a direct democracy clause. And I believe in 1930 or so, the politicians removed it. Exactly. So they had, okay, so they had a direct democracy clause in their Irish constitution, and of course the representatives decided, no, this is not good, because if we keep this in here, then we're gonna be powerless. So we have to eliminate it, and they did, and they were successful at it. And of course, the people of Ireland were, I guess at the time, were sleeping. But I guess at that time it was different. We didn't have the news coverage in the media. I mean, this is probably back in the 30s, I believe. I'm not too sure, but this just goes to show you what direct democracy does to representative democracy. It really scares the politicians, because they know that once it's implemented, they don't have the same power. They can't wield it like they used to. Yeah.
Well, I love it. I love it because, and I want to know more about it, but it's certainly better than what we have today. I love its ability, it sounds like, to break apart political parties. I like the idea that it'll allow folks to pick and choose where they land on certain issues. They don't have to take the chaff with the wheat. They can just have the wheat that they want. And, you know, it probably would be the end of political parties at a certain point. So I can see where they would want to fight that. I can definitely see it would be extremely dangerous to the corporate control of an entire nation that funnels trillions of dollars into those corporations. And so now, so you are working in the States with this as well, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have the majority of our members are actually from the States, and we started something called the Direct Democracy Coalition. And essentially, we're reaching out to other direct democracy groups on Facebook or basically anywhere that we can work together, so we can have a bigger range or bigger reach. And we're also reaching out to other think tanks. Also, I mean, we work with anarchists. We work from people from the right. We work with people from the left. And even though they think in a left or right leaning manner, they still they know that the current system is a failure, and they came across direct democracy, and now that they know about it, they want to work with us. So it's not as big as we want it to be, but it is growing. And you know, I hate to say it, but it's going to take something catastrophic in order for people to say, okay, you know what, I'm out of the system. And right now, a lot of people are kind of comfortable with it. Some are really uninformed, and I don't want to use the stupid word because that's not fair. They're uninformed, and of course, like you were mentioning about the news media down in the States, it's heavily corporatized, you know. And at one point, a long time ago, you know, during the Walter Cronkite years, you know, it wasn't about left or right. It was about, you know, delivering news unbiased the way they seen it, and there was no left or right leaning angle on it. And that's not the case any longer. So, I mean, you can blame them for people being uninformed. But again, with the internet, there's no excuse now. You know, look, I don't listen to any of the mainstream media anymore. I think they're just a bunch of, you know what. And the majority of my news I get is from smaller outfits, smaller companies, even one-man shows. I trust those guys more than I trust them. I know that they're going to deliver it as truthful and as unbiased as they see it. And I think this is the way we have to go.
Right. But it's definitely, like I said, I think it's a step in the right direction. So now what states are you involved in, and how do people get involved if they want to promote direct democracy in their state with their representatives?
Well, so we've opened up Facebook pages for each state, not all of them, but certain states. And right now we're looking for basically independents that want to use the software and that are going to bring direct democracy to its constituents. So essentially, they're going to do what Michael Allman was trying to do. Was he wasn't going to vote on the issues. His vote only counted as one. He was going to ask his constituents to vote on the bills also. And then he was going to go to Congress and he's going to say, okay, here, this is the way I vote. Not the way Michael Allman voted, but the way my constituents voted. So those are the type of people that we're actually looking for, is independents that are going to represent on any level. It could be, you know, the local city, town, state, or federal. So yeah, basically we're just looking for people that believe in direct democracy and want to spread the word and want to become independents. Now, with that said, we are pretty close to coming out with a voting platform that actually goes beyond a voting platform, and it's going to be a tool for these independents to use. So we're not making any excuses any longer. We're close to completing it, and I'll let you know when we're done with it, and we'll give you a demo. I've seen it, and it's absolutely amazing. The way they put it together was just blew me away, and it's going to be a game changer for sure. And again, this is a tool that the independents can use.
I love the sound of that, and I'm a technology guy, so I appreciate things like that. And it sounds like you guys are kind of working at it from multiple angles to solve the problems. And I guess what gets me that I'm thinking about is I'm trying to think about what are good objections to moving forward and giving people more power in their government. And I guess I told you my son, he actually came home a few days ago. He's like, Dad, we were talking about something at school. I said, what are you talking about? He said the teacher was talking about direct democracy. I said, that sounds familiar. I said, I thought that's what Nick was talking about on Chris's show not too long ago. He said, yeah, Dad, it sounds like a good idea. He's a senior in high school. He said, it sounds like a good idea. You know, we should look at it. But the teacher didn't like it. And he said most of the classroom didn't like it either. You know, and now that I think about it, one of the objections was something about mob rule. And what I guess doesn't process with me is why anybody would think that this would be any worse than what we have today. Anything that might give people more control in their government would have to be a good thing.
No, absolutely. And again, it's what they've been told. It's what they learned from the founding fathers. And you know, if the founding fathers were around, I don't think they would like what the country turned into. You know, I'm just speaking hypothetically, but they were told that democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner, and that's not really the case. The democracy that they have now, the so-called democracy that they have now, is essentially, it is a mob rule, because you got a tiny group of people that you know, do things that they shouldn't do.
Right.
And
you can't stop them.
No, you can't stop them. Well, if you keep voting, yeah, you can't stop them. But if you say, well, you know what, I'm going to support this direct democracy thing, I'm going to support independence, then you can. But if you keep voting, and if you keep making the excuse that, well, I'm going to vote that party out because they're, you know, they're worse than the party that I want to vote for, they're not as bad. If you're going to start using that logic, then, you know, I'm sorry, there's no hope. But look, again, look at the country of Switzerland. You can go on Wikipedia, and you can see the past referendums that they voted on. There are so many of them, and it's not a difficult thing to do. The only thing is that people have to educate themselves, and again, there's no excuse for it now with the computer age. They can go online and do all the necessary research, talk to people. Look, we're doing it already, Gerald. I mean, we're on Facebook all the time debating political issues all the time, not only on Facebook, on YouTube, everywhere. So we're doing it now anyways. So you know what? Why don't we just, you know, make it constructive and use it so that we can vote it, you know, towards referendums.
Right. And it's secure. I mean, you think about it, I mean, we vote online now in terms of like taking polls and having discussions. And as far as security, we do most of our banking online, right? We do most of our banking on. So there's no question that the election couldn't be secure. And I think times like this, people have to really start to ask themselves a question: why don't we vote online? Why do they want to send you to antiquated machines that aren't secure, that half of them didn't even have the password? I think the passwords were admin or something crazy like that in one of the states that they looked at. Why do they keep doing this instead of using secure online technology or even open source? And I think a lot of it just has to do with there's a lot more control in our election system than what we're really even being told or what they're looking into. And so even outside of going down the path of whether or not the alphabet agencies, which we can get rid of if we had more influence in government, it's go ahead and to take our country back in that way. And I look at something else like 5G. The majority of people I know don't want 5G. They don't want it at all. And there's absolutely nothing anybody can do to stop it. The majority of people I know, they don't necessarily buy into chemtrails and geoengineering. Probably half of my friends do. But they all agree with whatever it is, it needs to stop. You know, we know there are billionaires that are doing geoengineering, that were caught doing things, that one was caught out in the ocean playing around. We've got Elon Musk now digging tunnels underneath LA. And so I think that all of these things come into play. And when people can't change them, when people can't take an action to stop these things, they grow highly frustrated and they completely check out of the political system altogether, or they just become, you know, more angry and more spiteful against the other side. So I don't really see a downside right here. I can't see this being any worse than where we are right now. We're at war on every single continent. Nobody disagrees with bring the troops home, but we can't bring them home. We're spraying chemicals all over plants and into the aquifers. We've got ocean dead zones. We've got geoengineering happening on this planet to a place where we are absolutely being involved in speeding about the destruction of ecosystems and climate change. And these are all things that if we had more say in government, instead of electing a representative who takes money from big business, we'd have the ability to do something about. So I really don't see a downside at this point.
Yeah, and going back to the think tanks and the political action committees, again, these think tanks can be comprised of professionals, professional scientists, and them trying to warn us and say, look, guys, if we don't make these laws tougher, we're not going to have an ecosystem. If we don't make tougher laws on animal hunting, we're not going to have any animals left. So these are issues that are brought on by concerned citizens, and also professionals that say that, look, if we want to move forward and save whatever ecosystem we have left, and we have to implement these laws. Then again, they can take up initiatives, and that's the beauty of direct democracy. There isn't an agenda by a politician that is being lobbied by a corporation. There isn't any of that.
Right.
It's about concerned citizens that want what's best for their country, for their state, and for their local city and town when it comes down to it.
Right. And so there are probably 1,000 different ideas that even are just briefly coming to my mind. I mean, getting the big money out of government, term limits for congressmen. I mean, and most everybody agrees on these things, but we don't have the influence. So that's good. Now, do you guys have a website? Is there I know you said you have a Facebook. I don't think we put that link in there.
Well, if they go on Facebook, it's called Direct Democracy Coalition, and just add yourself to the group. There's a lot of people there that are very knowledgeable about direct democracy, and they have different ideas on how to implement it. And any questions you have, you can come directly there.
Okay.
We used to have a website, but the website wasn't doing very well, so we pretty much abandoned it. But right now we're sticking to Facebook. We also have something on MeWe with the same name, Direct Democracy Coalition. And essentially, we don't want to be a country club either. We want to invite all ideologies, because that's what direct democracy is. If you really look at it, if you break it down, direct democracy is about different ideologies coming to the table and discussing on what we can do to make the country better, what we can do to make the state better, and so on and so on. So we don't want to say no to right-thinking people or left-thinking people. Me personally, I don't buy into any of that left-right paradigm bullshit as far as I'm concerned. It's all about ideas. And again, if you think more like a Republican, we don't want to say no to you. We want you to come. We want you to join. We want to talk. But more importantly, the first step is getting independents that believe in direct democracy and that are going to bring direct democracy to its constituents.
Right. Another one might be fracking.
Big time.
People. One of the sisters were talking about that her water was coming out yellow, and I don't know if that's related to fracking, but vaccines might be another one. I mean, I think there are endless things, and I don't believe in the left-right paradigm either. All there is people. Right. All there is people. Yep. And they have ideas, and they're forced into these bottle and groupings based on what the politicians align themselves with in a party and what corporations pay for. And so when we stop thinking about people as lefties and righties, and we just say, hey, is fracking a good idea? I think you're going to get people on all sides who agree that it's not a good idea. And it might be the majority. And you'll have some who say, well, we need more testing. We need more time. Maybe there's a safer way of doing it, and it might be that, we have the folks who say, no, we need to require solar energy, moving forward. So I think there's an awful lot of things we could do if we had more control in government. I personally, and this is my skepticism, I think it's going to be an uphill fight. I think the big corporations are going to see this coming, and they're not going to want to let go of their Republicans and Democrats that easily. So you got me interested for certain. You got me interested. Yeah. So you can count me in on the Facebook. I certainly would love to get involved in more of the discussion and figure out, is it going to be possible to roll out, direct democracy in more states?
You know what? It's already existing. It exists in some states already, but the problem is the politicians have done a good job of hiding it. And for obvious reasons. And, you're right, Gerard, it's not going to be an easy thing, but the more people that you have in the fight, then the easier it's going to get. But if it's only a few people trying to advocate for it, then it's going to be a little bit harder to get it done. Now, going back to the fracking thing, it's I don't want to talk about fracking in particular, but it's related to the environment. And we all know fracking is bad for the environment. The country of Switzerland, maybe about 2-3 years ago, they actually had a referendum on shutting down all the nuclear power plants. So, because they realized that if there was a meltdown, it was going to be detrimental to the country. So they decided over maybe 10 years or so to phase out all of the nuclear power plants and introduce more green type alternatives. So again, that's something that the people took up. They took up an initiative to say, look, these nuclear power plants. We all seen Fukushima. Right. Chernobyl was another example, and they decided, you know what, this is not a good thing to have. So they decided that over a 10-year or so span, they're gonna close them, and they're gonna switch over to more greener, safer power.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean there's the wind vanes, and if you want to put a wind vane up, there are different township rulings now where you can't, because the power industry went around and they've been banning that in townships. I think about, funneling weapons, right? Most Americans are pretty anti-gun control. I mean, they're pretty pro. Well, some are pretty pro gun control. Me, I don't have an issue with guns, and I don't have an issue with the Second Amendment at all. But most people do, and what I try to focus people on is, well, maybe we need to think about the government funneling weapons around the world first, right? The government and their military kill more than anybody else. And so if guns are an issue, maybe we look at having referendums as far as where the United States can funnel weapons, where Canada can funnel weapons. And, people got excited when Jamal Khashoggi was killed, and different governments talked about walking away from Saudi Arabia. And now the funny thing is, here we are 3 weeks down the road, and they're pretty much all, but I think Germany, all the rest of them are backing out of it. All the rest of them are saying, we're going a little far on not funneling weapons to Saudi Arabia, because what's happening in Yemen is torture. I mean, it's an artificial famine. We're torturing people. And so I think those are things that people could have control in. And so, like I said, I don't really see a downside. They want to end the war in Afghanistan. Most people know that the war in Afghanistan now is about the poppies, right? It's just simply about the opioids, opium. And so we could end that if we had more control in the government. So I think there's endless things that people could start to fix. And these, I think, are issues people care about. They're not the ones that are given to them by their representatives, by politicians. But yeah, so I think it's a great idea. We are way past homesteading and riding horse and buggy to Washington. People need to represent themselves.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I always say that direct democracy is the first step in human evolution. For all the resource-based economy fans, this could be the first step into getting a resource-based economy in your state, or even in your country. And you're leaving the decision making up to the people to decide if they want it or not. And if the majority of people in your town want a resource-based economy, then they're going to get it. So again, this is when you let the citizens decide or make them the final decision makers, then things. And again, this is not a utopia. I don't want to state that this is utopia, and it's not. There's going to be mistakes that are going to happen, but you can rest assured that the citizens are going to fix them, because they're not going to want that for their city or their town or even their state or their country. They're going to want to fix the wrongs, and that's the thing. Right now, it's it's all fueled by money. Obviously, it's all fueled by greed. There is no morals. There's no about Forget about the 40 million people that are living in poverty in the States. Forget about them. Who gives a shit about their rights? They have no rights because they have no money.
Right.
So forget a direct democratic system. The majority of people might say, no, they're citizens just like us, and we have to take care of them, and they will. So it is, in my opinion, I think it's the first step to human evolution, and it goes nowhere but upwards in a positive manner, anyways.
Right. And I agree with you, and you're definitely hitting one of my happy bones in terms of resource-based economy and like moving forward and taking care of people. We are in a different world. We do have robots now and automation, and we can be utilizing these things to help people, not just to kill people. So I'm definitely on board with that. I think that's a fantastic idea. But there's so many different things that we actually could do in terms of driving forward, evolving our government out of the lock that we seem to be in. So I love it. I love it. I don't see any downsides. I don't see any downsides. Florida might be another good example. You know, Florida, they want to do something about the sugar canes. Because the sugar canes are dumping all that excess phosphates into Lake Okeechobee, and it's killing the aquatic system, and it's creating ocean dead zones. The citizens could stand up and do that. But the politicians, they don't move forward on any of this. And I think that we have certain conditions in our country where you've got corporations or industries that buy both sides, and they make sure that nothing actually gets done. They argue and argue and argue, but nothing moves forward.
No, exactly. And people don't know about political parties that each party's got a party whip. And believe it or not, they're probably more, they probably have more authority and say than the actual leader of the party. So if any of the politicians act out of line, you can guarantee that they'll be removed. And I'm not talking about, they'll just be fired. They'll be just kicked out of the party. So there are agendas within the parties, and they have to toe the line, basically. And if they don't, then they're not going to have a job. That's just the way it goes, right? And if anybody that tries to go in either the Republican or Democratic Party and think that they can change it within, I'm sorry, but you're going to fail miserably. Yeah. I believe Bernie Sanders tried, but he failed miserably also. And then later on, he actually denied any of the corruption that was that they were using against him. He denied it. So that just goes to show you that he's got to fall in line also. So that's why I keep telling people that, yeah, you can keep voting all you want, but you're just going to go into this vicious cycle of nothingness. Nothing will ever get resolved. It just get worse. So you have a choice. As a citizen, you can take back your politics and change the system. Not voting for a political party that's not going to represent you, but actually changing the system and making people vote on the issues and not on the political parties or politicians.
Well, yeah, what's giving people back the ability and the power to change their system. Corporations being people is another one. You can get rid of this idea that corporations are actually people. You can get rid of the idea of lobbyists altogether. There's so many different things that, so I like it from the perspective of it's a tool that you're giving people to fix the things that have gone wrong in their government.
That's right.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Will you have any closing words, brother? I know you have to get running.
Yep.
So I don't want to hold you too long.
Well,
do you have any closing statements?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for having me on the show. It's been great, and I really appreciate this. And again, if you guys have any questions or concerns about direct democracy, come up, reach out to us on Facebook, Direct Democracy Coalition. We're looking for more people to advocate for it. And if you feel strongly about it, then, reach out to us. We're here on Facebook.
All right. Certainly appreciate you coming on. I'll definitely look out for you, and we'll have some discussions a little further down the road. You have to come on again. We can talk more about it. I think someone else is actually coming on to talk about direct democracy later. One of your, I think someone you introduced me to. He was actually on the thread a little earlier today. But we'll continue the conversation moving forward. Like I said, I think it's a great idea. I think that giving people a tool to modify their government is more important. We're supposed to be a population that actually controls its government. We haven't become that. We're a population, if anything, that is probably held captive by corporations that control our politicians. So I like the idea of undoing the model put in place by horse and buggy riding politicians in a time we didn't have technology to actually have say in government, and we need to get more say back in. So we can go through voting nights and we can actually vote for things that actually modify. And on November 7th, things can look different as opposed to looking the exact same they did November 6th.
So, exactly. And thank you so much.
All right. Hey, Nick, you have a great night. Everybody, thanks for joining. Great comments. I'll go through them a little later, and we will see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night. Bye-bye.